All right. So a warm welcome again to everyone in the Zoom room, and and for those who are watching this in the recording, welcome to crafting effective resumes and cover letters. Again, a big thank you, a shout out to Carmen and Azim for inviting me. My name is Albert, and I'm a career education manager for career and volunteer services at SWU, and my focus is supporting faculty of arts and social sciences students. So, of course, the students in the Department of Economics is a big part of that. So I just want to start things off by acknowledging that SFU, we are located on the unceded territory of on the shared traditional Coast Salish lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kikite, Kwanlin, Semiahmoo, and Tawasan peoples on whose traditional territories our three campuses reside. So I acknowledge that I am an uninvited guest and settler, and I'm also an immigrant to this land that the traditional or indigenous people call it Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to be here. When I moved here when I was 14, so now I'm raising my family, my two beautiful children, and I'm very grateful that I'm here. I can live, play, and also to serve other people on this beautiful land. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So today, again, lots of information I want to share with you. We're going to spend a good chunk of our time together talking about resume, different sections, also cover letter as well. Again, want to highlight that there will be a post-event extended Q&A. So I will try to stop in between also to answer questions, but I will also have some extended time because at the end of the day, everyone's situation is different, and I wanted to make sure that your questions get answered today, especially that you're here. So let's talk about how we can interact. I would like to use Slido. For our engagement. Part of it is because not only it could remain anonymous if you prefer, it could also have a chance to upvote. So I don't know if you're familiar with Slido, but if you go to slido.com, use the code or hashtag econ resume. So thank you again also for Alice for dropping that link in the chat. So when you go there, there will be a few questions that I'll be asking for some feedback, but you can also show us. Perfect. Thank you for the person who dropped the hello. So this is what it looks like, and you can also once you get there, you can also upvote certain questions. So you will see on the share screen that I'll have the Slido screen turned on the whole time so that I can see the questions as they come. If it's a question that is related to what I've just talked about, I'll try my best to acknowledge it right away. But if it's a topic that I'll cover, I'll also let you know. So yeah, keep them coming. At the same time, if you prefer to just unmute and just verbally ask the questions, that's okay too. So whatever that you're comfortable, I just want to make sure that you have a chance to ask your questions and interact, because the last thing I want is just me talking the whole time, right? Okay, so let's just do a little bit of warm up here using Slido. Again, in the past, I've spent a lot of time working with students on resume and cover letter. There are a lot of technical things, a lot of like, oh, how should I do this? But in my conversations with them, I also I can also feel and acknowledge the emotions, behind the scenes in terms of preparing resume and cover letter. So again, in an anonymous way, I love to hear what emotions are you experiencing in preparing your resume and cover letter. For some of you, might be a lot of anxiety or fear. For some of you, be like excitement, or questions. So again, love to see for all of you who are in the room, how you feel, what do you go through, what emotions come to your mind as you're preparing your resume. It could be emotions that you've experienced in the past, or emotions that you're experiencing right now. Wow. So thank you. Wow. So this Slido thing seems to be working really well. Thank you for all of you who are dropping the answers. I hope you can see that on the share screen. Let me know if there's any issues. I can make it bigger or whatever. Yeah, a couple of people, more than probably two, says confusion. Some of you says anxiety. Let me just make this a little bit bigger, as that's probably a little bit easier to see. Uncertainty, right? A lot of anxious, anxiety, frustration. Yeah, one more thing to do. I love that mini quote, right? Like, there's so much already about this job search. Like, let's just add to yet another list. Stressful, unsure. Thank you so much. Like, I really appreciate everybody who who shared their thought with with the group in the Slido. Because if you're experiencing this, you are just being a human, being a human, being a person. It's what we all go through as a human being. There seemed to be a lot of mystique around this whole resume and cover letter, but my role as a career educator is really to hope to really sort of explain sort of the rationale and intention. I know sometimes it does get pretty sort of itty-gritty in terms of like, oh, how do you do this bullet point? How do you do this color? It could get pretty specific, but I just want to share with you that, if I can share with you the intention and the logic behind it, you as a smart undergrad or graduate students, you can handle this. And, so given that, I acknowledge that despite the frustration and confusion and anxiety, I hope that at the end of this workshop, it might just shift the needle just a little bit better. Again, can't promise that I'll take away everything, that you're going through right now, but I just want to acknowledge that it's okay to experience that. And hopefully by picking up some of these techniques and ideas, you just feel a little bit more confident and comfortable with this whole topic of resume and cover letter. So thank you again for sharing. I'm going to go back to the Q&A. As well. Oh, thank you. There are a couple of comments here too, right? Like, yeah, a lot of anxiety and depressed over this. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, just being overwhelmed by networking and cover letter. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Like, there's just so much. And, and again, being a newcomer to this country many years ago, for me, English isn't my first language. I have gone through a pretty steep learning curve myself as well in terms of the language and how do you sort of communicate with people, or how you communicate myself through cover letter and resume. So I don't know if some of you are experiencing that, but I can certainly relate, and hopefully again some of the things that I can share would help you alleviate some of that. So, just to put things back into context, right? I know we're talking about resume and cover letter, but I feel like these days, especially in this whole job search process, is more than just the traditional resume, right? And I couldn't emphasize more that, hey, if I have another hour to talk about LinkedIn, I love to do that because, even before the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic where things have gone more virtual, LinkedIn has definitely become more of a prevalent tool in terms of, recruitment and also job application. So, it works, more like a master resume because you are including everything. But again, if you haven't started yet, it's never too late to start. It's not so much about having a perfect LinkedIn profile from the get-go, but it's about just building it step by step. Second thing I'd like to talk about later in the workshop as well is this whole idea called the Applicant Tracking System. It's this fancy word that describes an online system that takes people's application and resume and cover letter, and so that for recruiters and hiring managers, so that it gets organized for them, but also filter out applicants in that system. So how do you beat the robot, so-called robot, at this game so that your application will float to the top, more so of being filtered in, not filtered out? Number three, I can't say enough about portfolio as well. Sometimes it's better to show than tell. So having work samples, even for your work, or even for experience in the area of economics, or data analysis or report, having a chance to show off your work is, it's just as critical than just talking about it, right? So think about that in addition to your resume. So, and I acknowledge that, sorry if I just added one more thing on your radar, but we can definitely chat more about that. And bottom line is, the last thing I want to say is, regardless how hard we work on our resume will never be as good as you, the person. The reason why I'm saying that is, in a lot of job application process, it is about, submitting your application, your resume and cover letter. So those documents go before you. But there are also a lot of job application situations where perhaps you have you know the recruiters, or you know the manager, or you have a connection, meaning that they know you, the person, before they see this document. So it is, important that, if you have a chance to introduce yourself, for them to relate to you as a person, it will always be better, to connect yourself with the organization and the company, before you send in your resume, because again, you, the person, is always better than what the resume can represent. So again, just try to stay a little bit of high level, just so that some of the stuff doesn't get lost in terms of the the details. But look at these just general, right? When it comes to resume effectiveness, it all comes down to content and format, right? So this notion of, is the information there, targeted? Focus on your strengths and focus on your accomplishment. Is it customized or targeted to the role, which I'll talk a little bit more later. But also, format is also important. Not only the information that you have, but how you present that, right? So being strategically ordered is important. You want it to be visually appealing. So again, if you feel like sometimes there's just so much details in the resume, just take a step back and think about, do I have the information? And does it look nice and attractive, and effective in that regard? So I'm going to dive into what I mean by some of those things, but I just want to highlight some of these areas. So one of the things that is really interesting is when I work with students, they'll say, hey, Albert, take a look at my resume and give me some comments, right? So sometimes I'm like, well, okay, that's great. Your resume looked good to me. But the analogy that comes to my mind is, perhaps somebody is working on their archery skills, right? Maybe like shooting an arrow, right? And they ask me, well, how is my archery skill, right? So my question for them is, well, are you planning to shoot at that apple on top of that person's head, or are you planning to shoot at the person, right? Because it all comes down to what you're targeting. Then we're able to say, well, did the arrow hit the target? So first of all, when it comes to looking at, reviewing resume, the best place to start isn't the resume or cover letter themselves, but it's the job posting. It's paramount to understand what is the job, require. Do you understand what are the things that they are focusing on, and also determine, whether you, the person, check off all the things that they're looking for in terms of criteria. Is there a fit? Identify what you want to highlight, and so you can target that. So let me dive into a little bit of that, right? So one thing to keep is really interesting when you think about this whole, job search or job seeking process, is that for every position, it's almost like the employer has this notion of an ideal candidate, right? That has all the skills, all the experience, all the education, all the personality. And then there's us, me, as a job seeker, right? So when you think about that, me as a person, like I've got lots of different skills, different experience, personality, some certification, also value. Like there are lots of things about me that I can share. And in the past, I'm certainly thinking, okay, how can I cram all this into a resume? But at the same time, what the employer is looking for in an ideal candidate is something very specific to the role, to the organization. So in some way, what we're trying to do is, how do we align ourselves to present ourselves as the ideal candidate? Meaning that if there's a particular skill that they're looking for, how do I make sure that I strategically organize it so that it comes forth right away? How do I highlight certain experience? How do I highlight the personality, the certification, and values that I have? Again, can't say enough about, unless you understand what the job requires or understand what the job posting is calling for, it's hard to do this process. But I can't say enough how important this process is, because not only this applies to resume and cover letter, this also apply when you go into the interview, right? When they're asking you questions, are you able to highlight the skills that you have, the experience that you have, and your way to explain your personality that is a fit to the position? So keep this picture in mind, and always go well in terms of not just how you prepare your resume and cover letter, but how you can review and critique and improve your resume for that particular role. And I know that when I'm bringing this up, many of you might ask the question, well, what if I don't have the exact experience, perhaps, some of you might be wondering, well, I didn't get a chance to do co-op, or I didn't get a chance to do a lot of work experience. I was just really focusing on my courses. So what if I don't have the exact experience that what they're looking for, right? So for many of you, like I've been thinking of, of some of the situation that, Azam and Carmen share with me of some of the situations of what students have gone through. So a couple of things came to my mind, right? First of all, one of the things is you want to look beyond just work experience, because you might be involved in sports, arts, personal projects. And for many of you coming from, a global background, international background, like all those things that even though it's not work or paid experience or even experience, within Canada, those are all kind of relevant. So, so that's the first thing I want to highlight. As you can see, my PowerPoint just, just crashed again. So I'm going to try it one more time. But good thing is I also can rely on Alice. So so if this crash again, I'm just going to kindly ask Alice to share her screen with me, so that with us, so that we can go back. So I'm going to give it one more try. There we go. All right, here. Okay. So let's see how long this will last. So yeah, and the second thing is beyond looking for, just work experience, but you can also draw from multiple sources. What I mean by that is there might not be the exact work or exact paid position that matches exactly what you are applying at this moment. But one way to look at that is maybe a particular skill can be drawn from a course that you've taken, in your undergrad. Maybe there's a particular experience or working with people that can be drawn from a volunteer experience, or maybe there's a particular technique that you can draw on from a hobby. So again, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship, because if you've never done that before, right? This old saying of you need experience to get experience. So draw from multiple sources, multiple areas of your life, that to say, okay, I got this piece from here, I got this piece from here, I have all the pieces, it's just coming from different areas, because it is still you, the person, holistically in many different perspectives, right? Another thing I also want to mention is back it up with facts and stories, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, because it's one thing to say it, it's another way to show it, which is much more effective. How have you done it? Where have you done it? You can also back that up if you don't have the exact experience, and you can talk about where you have done it. And more importantly, the last thing is find a close alternative, right? Because, when somebody say, oh, do you know Python, right? And you might be like, oh, like, I don't really know. I don't have that, but how about what is something, a similar scripting language that you might know, or perhaps another close alternative in terms of the skill? It's always better to say, I don't have the exact one, but I have something similar, than to say I don't have it, right? So keep that in mind as well. So under that knowledge, right, let's go back to talk about deconstructing job posting, right? Again, I can't say enough about, even though you might be, you might not know everything about that role, everything about that organization, a good place to start is the job posting itself, right? Looking at what are the qualifications, what are the skills and knowledge, what is the organizational culture as being described by the job posting. And the idea is that you wanted to identify keywords and key phrases that perhaps they're looking for, and you wanted to make sure that you make reference to it, or you try to align your resume according to that. So let's do a little bit of an example. So let's look at organization culture. So we pulled this from a CIBC, CIBC job description for an analyst. Again, I wish we were sponsored by CIBC, but we're not. It's just a sample sample job posting. So I just want to highlight this because we picked this up. So no affiliation to CIBC. Just want to declare that. But you are able to highlight. Again, one thing really easy thing to do is when you download a PDF, or when you just make a PDF out of that web page, you can use a PDF reader tool just to highlight things about organization culture, right? So looking at the mission, looking at the beliefs and values, looking at how the organization defines the business, people, and stakeholders. So, so if you look at some of the green portion, right, a mission to build relationship-focused bank for the future, open and approachable culture, integrate your life, at work and at home, right? Looking at some of these keywords in green, but also in blue in terms of some of their values, right? Innovation, collaboration, creativity, right? So again, take the time to really immerse yourself as if pretend that you are the hiring manager, right? What are the things that you're looking for in this role and somebody who fits with the team? And and look for those keywords. Again, same thing for qualifications, skills, and knowledge. Some of them are specific educational requirements, some are experience, some are specific credentials, job-specific skills, transferable skills, technical skills, right? So again, sometimes they're neatly organized in what is required or qualifications, but sort of pick up on that, but also pick up on things that probably show up more than once, right? Like, are there any words that just keep repeating itself, right? So those are also good clues to get a sense of what they value, what are they looking for, right? So again, one of those things that you can possibly do is after you have analyzed the job posting and you work on your resume, before you submit it, you're like, okay, how do I know whether it is close to what they're looking for? Then it's sort of a great way to go back to things that you've highlighted and ask yourself, do things that I've highlighted, or in terms of keywords, do they show up in my resume? Are they in the summary of qualification section? These are all the things that you can help yourself to do a review before you submit that resume and cover letter. So I'm just going to pause for a little bit, before I dive into resume sections. Any questions about deconstructing job posting and highlighting skills and qualification? Perhaps this might not be totally new to you, but you might have follow-up questions. So feel free to drop that in the Slido. And I can address that as we go. So and when you see other people's questions and you're interested, you can also upvote it. So that would also be helpful. So feel free to do that as I am launching into the next section, but I can definitely go back and answer some of the questions. So feel free to keep them coming, keep the questions coming. All right, so let's talk a little bit about resume sections, right? Commonly speaking, again, I don't want to say that, oh, this is like the only format, you should always do this section. Keep in mind, depending on the organization, depending on the job that you're applying for, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of ways of doing resumes, right? And even when we say resume, it's still emerging and evolving as we speak. But keep in mind, a good place to start is, looking at a summary section, having an education section, an experience section, and other things that are as related, right? Again, I can't say enough about there are different ways of grouping or structuring or organizing information. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but these are good sections to start. So one of my favorite section is definitely the summary or profile. It's called many names. Somebody call it the essential skills profile or summary of qualifications, but essentially I just call it the first section of your resume. A good metaphor that I use is almost like a trailer for the movie, right? If you are the full, 2.5-hour movie, what would the trailer be like? Meaning that, before they read the entire resumes, if they want to just get a taste of it, if you want to get a gist of it, what are the things that you want to highlight? In some ways, it's kind of like just like a trailer, right? You don't want to give away the full storyline, but you do want to highlight for the audience, there will be an explosion scene, there's a love story, there's this gadgets, I don't know what you include, but highlight a few things, maybe some really, punny jokes even, right? So highlight in terms of your education, your background, your experience, your skills, highlight that, and again, because this is at the very top of the resume, it gives people a chance to read it almost the first thing that they read when they read the resume, and kind of look at that to see whether it aligns with the position. So this is also the perfect section that you want to customize to align to what the job posting or the organization is looking for in that role. So Perfect. Just want to see a question there. Any tips on how to systematize the deconstruction of job posting when applying for several jobs? Great question. I appreciate that. So I want to quickly address that by saying, yes, if you're applying jobs that are very, very different, it seems like there's a lot of work to do in terms of just customizing to this one. But let's say, for example, if you really hone in on, analyst types of position in a financial institution, right? So you have a Cibc one and a TD Bank, and a credit union or whatever, right? Then you can almost look at the commonalities of some of these job postings and say, wow, like I keep seeing the same thing on the majority of these analyst positions. So in some ways, you can almost have a analyst resume for banks. Then I would imagine from job posting to job posting, you're changing, I don't know, 10 to 15% instead of 30, 40%, right? So again, this is one way of looking at making life easier because you're not necessarily redoing your entire resume for every single job posting. But I also want to acknowledge that, you really want to also because there are nuance and specific things that might change from one posting to another. So you want to pay attention to some of the details that are specific to a particular job over the other one. So look for the common themes, but also highlight the specifics so that that particular resume or application that you submit to that role does have everything that they're looking for from that organization's perspective. So, so hopefully, if I don't know if I totally answer your question, feel free to, follow up. But that's a really, really great question. So let's move on to education. This is fairly straightforward, but I also wanted to say that, if there's one thing I want to highlight about education is that when we say, oh yeah, Bachelor of Arts in Economics, or your degree, right? Sometimes it's important that if there is a particular course or particular project or particular type of methodology that you've learned, is really important to sort of highlight that in the example, in your resume, because if there's a particular skill that they're looking for, they wanted to know where you've learned it. Because just because you have a degree in economics, or just because you've taken all these required courses, there's no guarantee that the employer know exactly what skill you've learned. So again, depending of their, if their relevant coursework or project or even research, right? For example, going back to this job posting, maybe you have done a case study of a particular economic phenomenon that would be very relevant to the CIBC position. Well, then you might want to highlight within your education of that particular course and the project, and maybe you happen to get an A+ out of that too. So that would be something worth highlighting in the education section if there's something to support that you have a skill for this particular role. Let's talk about experience, right? Again, there's so many different ways of organizing experience. The most traditional way, obviously, is sort of the reverse chronological, start with the latest and sort of work your way back, right? But I also wanted to highlight that depending on your situation, you might also want to organize things in a more skill-focused manner. So let me give you an example of that, right? So in some ways, one way of organizing it, maybe it is a role that require you to work with customers or work with, internal stakeholders, right? So one way of looking at that is perhaps organize or you organize, group things that are communications or interpersonal, interpersonal communication related in one section, right? Maybe, again, this is just a brief example that we pull in terms of all these areas, and you can see that there is a mix of paid positions, but also volunteer position with with this last one in Nectus SFU. So this allows you to kind of combine experience that are in sort of different nature, paid versus unpaid, but group them under a particular skill set, right? Another way of looking at it, like I said, the more traditional of just sort of experience based, where you can just list them sort of in a reverse chronologically that highlight these few things. So again, I wanted to, emphasize that, if there is a particular, maybe for some of you, you've worked a number of part-time jobs that seemingly not related to the position that you apply for, but maybe there are particular skill set, like, again, a great example would be, a lot of your interpersonal skills might have been developed through your time doing a lot of part-time job, perhaps in the in the retail sector or in the hospitality sector, or maybe you work at a restaurant or fast food. So some of that interpersonal skills could be could be grouped under the section called customer service experience. So even though they might not be as, in terms of, it might not be seemingly directly relevant to, say, an analyst position, but you can highlight certain skill set to focus on so that you can show the employer that, yes, going back to the idea that you draw from different areas of your life to say that you have the combined experience for this job, but you are drawing it from different areas. So again, I acknowledge that I'm sharing with you a lot of information in a very relatively short period of time. It's just keep coming at you. Feel free to put in your questions in the chat. Sorry, not in the chat, but in the Slido, so I can address that. So and again, thank you for Alice for periodically putting in the Slido link. So for those of you who have just joined us, you can still ask questions through the Slido link. So bullet points. I can't say enough about, being, sort of making the most out of each bullet points, because again, when I work with students, it's not so much they struggle on sort of the format of the sections, because, it seems obvious. If you have a template, you can follow that. But how do you phrase, each bullet under an experience section where, where it can actually have good impact, right? So allow me to dive into a little bit more about that together. So first of all, is you want to emphasize the impact and accomplishment, right? It's all about not just what you've done, but it's the so what, meaning the impact, right? So can you provide evidence and results? Are you able to use action verbs and describe it in a concise manner? So let me give you some examples to show that, right? So one way of framing it is, in terms of ingredients, it's almost like a recipe for bullet point, is that you want to have a verb to describe the skill. You wanted to make sure that the task is there. So there's a noun somewhere, but more importantly, there's an outcome. So you almost can use this recipe to look at your bullet points and say, do I have a verb? Do I have a noun? But more importantly, do I have an outcome in terms of result or rationale? So let me give you an example, right? A standard bullet would be, I wrote a monthly newsletter, right? But again, so there is a verb, there's a noun, but there's no result. So let's take a look. A better bullet could be, I wrote a concise grant proposal and gained funding for 3 student club projects, right? So this would be a result for a better bullet. Oops, and PowerPoint just crap out on me. So Alice, it is okay if you share your screen. So I think it's kind of, I think my PowerPoint probably had enough of me. So I'm just going to stop share. And so I'll still keep an eye on the Slido on your end. So thank you so much, Alice, if you can share screen. Do you have privileges to do that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah,
would you like
perfect.
me to also put up the Slido as well?
Yes, if you can. Yeah, but I know it's kind of tricky to do both screens. So let's start with the PowerPoint for now, and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, so just give us a second there. So in the meantime, this is also a good time for you to jot questions down on the Slido. So I think we are somewhere at slide. Yeah, just keep going. Yeah, I'll let you know when we're there. I think probably another 10 slides or so, my gut feeling. Okay, there we go. We're at the bullet point. We're 42. There we go. Okay, so at the next one, please. So yeah, let's just go on to say technology do happens, and thank you very much. So yeah, so looking at the second example there, right? How can you turn a standard wrote monthly newsletter bullet to a better bullet, right? So how about wrote monthly economic student union newsletter column to inform 500 plus students on the latest top trends and economic news, right? So talk about why you do certain things, right? So not just like, oh yeah, I wrote the newsletter, but what is the impact? What is the intention? So, and again, some of these things are sometimes, if I put anybody on the spot, it might take them a while to, I'm like, oh, why am I doing this? I just have to do this because this is my job, right? But so take a little bit of time to think about what impact does that make, right? And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes if folks are really good at what they do, they just do it. Sometimes I ask students, well, how good is your work? They just say, well, I don't know. I just do it, right? So sometimes I even ask them to think about, okay, I know you're really good at this, so it's hard for you to say how good you are, but can you imagine if you have to train somebody who is new, who is still learning how to do this, like what kinds of things would go wrong, right? And then they kind of say, oh yeah, like somebody might forget about this, might miss this. Oh, then I realized that, oh yeah, so part of the impact is to ensure that there's that accuracy or ensure that this is communicated in a concise manner. They're like, oh yeah, that's right, right? So sometimes you just need a little bit of time to sort of think through it to be able to know that. So next slide, please, Alice. So another example we can look at is a standard bullet will be, oh, I analyze data and identify trends represented by the data, right? So, again, a way of making it better is maybe collect and analyze economic data, identify issues and trends, presented recommendations to drive strategic production decision making. So this is more of the rationale, right? Like, what are you trying to achieve, not result? I think there's a typo there. Collect and analyze economic data. But you can also put in some figures, if possible, in terms of results, right? Conducted inventory data analysis, identify patterns and trends in complex multivariable data sets, recommended inventory control process that reduced overstock by 10%, right? So again, not just talk about, what you've done, but how, the impact that it made. So again, I want to acknowledge that it might not be something that you can come up immediately, but give yourself a little bit of time to think about what is some of that accomplishment? What is some of the difference that I've made by doing the work that I do? And and again, it might just be one sentence, but these are the type of thinking that you want to put in it to make that bullet point really, really stands out. All right, so again, I only devoted like 4 slides on bullet point. I feel like this could take another 20 minutes, but again, I just want to highlight that. If you have more specific questions, feel free to drop that in the Slido and I can talk about that a little bit more. So next slide, please, Alice. So keep in mind, we've spent a lot of time talking about content and section. Now we're talking about, format and layout. Again, how do you make it visually attractive? How do you make it easy to read, easier to find information, but also in ordering it in a strategic way so that the most relevant information and stuff is easily picked up, right? Again, keep in mind that a resume, allow me to point out the obvious, is not being read like a paper, or an article where people will read it line by line, paragraph by paragraph, right? Just like when you go on any web page or when you scan any magazines, it's like they open a page or open that document or your resume, their eyes jump from places to places, right? In fact, depending on which research that you've read, some say, hiring managers spends anywhere between, 10 to 15 seconds in that first look. Right. So part of it is how, not only targeting content that gets their attention, but also visually, how do you, make that, how do you make it attractive, right? So, so keep that in mind. So next slide, please. So one way to look at it is to, again, you do not have to start with a blank Word file, right? Again, because sometimes that could be really intimidating. So definitely check out canva.com. They have tons of resume templates. And again, some of you might say, well, I'm applying to a bank. Like, I don't need like super fancy, templates. So this is actually a very good point, because depending on the industry or sector that you're applying, right? They might be looking at something from a little bit more formal, a little bit a little bit more traditional versus something more creative and more colorful. So keep in mind on the organizations that you're applying for, if you're applying for a government or a financial institution, something more traditional, but it can still be organized and stand out versus if you're applying for the tech sector, or for, some sectors, that require a lot of more, color. So find a template that works for you. And I keep, another silly analogy that I keep in mind is when it comes to resume templates or look and feel, it's like fashion, right? Because so what works for you, or for somebody, what works for somebody in terms of the way they dress certain ways might not always look well for you. So keep in mind that, so the best thing is check out different templates, pull in the things that, that you like, and develop a style of your own. So again, the next slide, please, just some examples to take a look at, and again, when you Google, there are tons of resume templates. So don't feel like you need to start from scratch, but take the time to, to customize the look and feel that you want so that, it could organize things in a little bit in a visually standout manner. Another resource that I want to share with you is called the Resume Gallery by the SFU, our learning community. Next slide, please. So I don't know if I have a link there, so if I don't, you can just Google Resume Gallery, SFUOLC. Oh, actually, I do have a link there. So basically, I'm going to drop that, Alice, because I know it's easier for me that way because you might be on full screen. So yeah, so do check out some, again, I wouldn't say any of these are perfect because no such thing, is called a perfect resume, right? But it gives you ideas for your own resume. How do I organize certain things? How do I play with the formatting? It certainly gives you some ideas. Okay, so in terms of principles, next slide, please. Think about CRAP, right? C-R-A-P, right? Think about contrast. How do you use thickness, bolding certain things, color and font size to keep things organized, right? Repetition, right? How do you use things consistently? The same font, same shape, same spacing, because the last thing you want is to be very different from section to section. So that repetition, that consistency is important. Alignment, right? Use tabs to vertical align, every page, making sure that it lines up nicely, and also proximity, making sure that related content is in that same area. So again, these are just principles, how everyone apply it to the situation differently. But again, using, the more templates that you see, the more examples you see, the more that you probably kind of get a visually, oh yeah, like this is probably something I can go for. All right. So, so before we talk about, this notion of applicant tracking system, feel free to drop any questions about formatting, about content, about resume as we move forward. I'll keep an eye on the Slido screen while we talk about the next section, and I can go back to answer some questions. So I know we promised to talk about applicant tracking system, right? Again, it is so common these days where, especially applying to large organizations or government agencies or departments, that something called, applicant tracking system, or ATS. In that regard, what it does is that, it is an online system that not only organize all the applicants' information as well as the resumes and cover letters, but it also uses, depending on, the system algorithm that picked up on certain keywords, right? So regardless of what the algorithm is, it's really about the keywords that a particular role, particular organization is looking for, and they're using that to scan your resume. So one tool that I like to recommend, again, no affiliation, no sponsorship whatsoever, but this service called JobScan. I wanted to acknowledge that it is a for-fee service, but the reason why I want to highlight that is that you can still sign up an account and have 5 free scan. So if unless you have a lot of resumes to scan, you can just use it once or twice and it is free. So how it works is that you can actually copy and paste the job posting and also copy and paste your resume as if you're applying, and then the system will try to scan both documents, the job description and also the resume and cover letter, to see how well it matches so that you can identify certain gaps in certain areas that you can add to it or modify your resume to match that. So so this is one, suggestions that I want to use, and there are also some tips as well. So next slide, please, Alice. So some tips to keep in mind is place contact information on both pages and not just header or footer, right? Because sometimes depending on how they read PDF files or Word files, you might want to make sure that there's contact information in the content as well. You want to be a little bit conservative with the formatting. I know we just talked about formatting, make it look nice, but when it comes to these sort of applicant tracking system, they sometimes don't read very well, so keep the formatting to a minimum, just so that they can pick up on the words a little bit easily. Use standard headings. So again, you want to use standard headings in the different sections so that the system can recognize certain section is being referred to certain sections like experience or education. Job titles matter, right? Because again, if they are, this going back to this whole notion of keywords, right? How do you, if they're looking for a particular role, what are some of the keywords like job titles they might be looking for with somebody's experience? So make sure that you include that. Next slide, please. So again, use exact keywords. I can't say enough. So when you deconstruct or analyze that job posting, make sure you pick up the keywords and make sure it's in there, because it's exactly how the system will be working. All right, so I just realized there's also another question. How many bullets per job experience is the norm? So, okay, let me get back to that. So after we cover that, I just realized there's a question there. So sorry for a little bit behind on that. So, so let's talk about number 6. Use specific month and year to date. So again, use sort of a standard format just so that they know a certain experience was done, back in 2019 or 2020 March. Make sure you do that. Keep font simple and use a concise, legible file name in a docx format. So again, this is what I want to say. You have to read the instructions very carefully. Some systems are very good with both PDF and Microsoft Word file. Some might just take a Word file. So again, depending on a particular system, just make sure that you read the instructions carefully, because the last thing you want is to upload an ineligible file, and then they cannot pick up any of the information on that file. All right, thank you. So I want to go back to answer that question, but before that, next slide, please, Alice, is to I've covered a lot of ground, in terms of the last, 20, 30 minutes or so. I wanted to get a sense from the group, like, is there one specific change here? I know there could be many. So, again, if you want to put 2 or 3, that's okay too. But at least what is one specific change are you going to add to your resume, right? So looking at your situation, looking at your resume, what would be one thing that wouldn't it be nice for me to, add to that? So I'm just gonna share screen so that you can see, the Slido response. So what is one specific change that you want to add? So Alice, thank you again. I might have to ask you to share the slides again after we go through this. So thank you. Strengthen my bullet points, right? I also want to answer that question that the other person raised earlier, about how many bullet points per experience is the norm. This is a really good question, because like many answers that I wanted to share with you when it comes to resume, is that it depends, right? So one of the things I say is, I know that in the past, people are trying to be very consistent with the formatting. So, okay, 3 bullets for every single job, right? But essentially, when you have 3 bullets, for example, in some ways, you are acknowledging that, yeah, like every single job is worth the same explanation, right? But in reality, there might be some job that is super relevant to what you're applying for, where there's some other jobs, it would be, yeah, it was just a volunteering experience, or it is just a part-time job. So my question is, the point that I'm trying to make is, if it's a particular role that is very relevant and highly, there are a lot of skills that the role that you're applying for is looking for, don't feel shy to dedicate a little bit more bullets, right? Because if it's more relevant, definitely you want to tell people more about that, right? So there's no hard and fast rule in terms of how many bullets you want to keep. I mean, you do want to have at least 2 or 3, right? If you have 1 bullet, it will be awkward. If you have too many, that will be hard to read. But also keep in mind that there is that flexibility. If it's a role that requires a little bit more explanation, then you might, then it is okay to have a little bit more bullets. So I hope that answered the question. So, going back to this, to the response that many of you have shared, adding my name and contact method in the second page, that's great. Bullets, strengthening my bullets, take advantage of Canva templates. Yeah, like you don't have to start from scratch, right? And I know there are also some comments there, strengthen my bullet points. I just noticed that there are some that have, I thought there were some comments there, but that have disappeared, but that's okay. Maybe it was just comments that was moved to there. So, but if there was supposed to be a question and then it disappeared because for some technical reason, please feel free to put the question in the Q&A section again. Okay, thank you for that. So let's talk about cover letter. So Alice, if you can share the screen again, slide 53, that will be good. Oh, I need to stop sharing so that you can share. So there we go. Thank you again for doing that. So cover letter. So one of the things that, is really interesting is that because in the past, students have asked me, well, this day and age, especially when, when we apply online, or sometimes through email, like, why would I need a cover letter, right? So I wanted to allow me to just highlight really quickly, a cover letter, right? So because part of it, there are some similarities. Just wondering, Alice, are you able to see the share screen? No? Do you mind want to stop share and try that again? I can also give mine a try. Yeah, it looks like we're having some issues with PowerPoint today, but hey, that's just, that's just technology. So while we're sorting that out, I am trying to be multitask. Perfect. There we go. Thank you again. So we're at slide 54. So, yeah, if you can jump to slide 54, that would be great. So it's okay. Yeah, you can just scroll there. So there is some there is some similarity and also differences when it comes to resume and cover letter, right? Things that are similar is that, just like a resume, you want to target your cover letter, right? You want to make sure that what they're looking for is being mentioned in the cover letter. Next 2 slides, please. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so if you can do one more click, that would be great. So, sorry, actually a few more. Yeah, okay, perfect. Just stop there right now. Perfect. You want to highlight why you're a great fit, and you want to use stories as evidence to illustrate, just like you want to talk about those accomplishments in your resume bullets, right? But here's the point, right? If I can do that in the resume, why am I saying the same thing in the cover letter, right? Here are some of the differences in cover letter. Can you do 2 more clicks, please? So one thing that you want to, that is different when it's a cover letter is that it gives sort of a bit of a narrative, right? When your resume is pretty much sort of bullet points or in point form, a cover letter allows you to almost, describe yourself in a more narrative way. Basically you can actually use sentences and paragraphs, almost like the way that you would talk instead of a bullet points. And in return, it allows you to describe your why, right? Your passion, your motivation, and your rationale in terms of why you wanted this, work for this organization, why you want to work for this job. So next slide, please. So let's take a look at next slide, please. We're probably going to skip this slide. Looking at the 3 main sections, right? Again, somebody asked me, well, how many paragraphs, how many sections? The way I look at it is really just 3 areas: introduction, body, and closing, right? Some sections you might have a little bit more paragraphs in terms of the body, right? But again, how long or how short your cover letter, it comes down to your audience, right? You could, but generally speaking, you want to keep that into 1 page, but at the same time, does it have to be 5 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs or 6 paragraphs? It all comes down to your audience. Do they have the capacity to read a little bit more, or do you actually want to be short and sweet, right? But the idea is that in the introduction, you want to capture the attention by telling your why. In the body, you want to highlight how you match what the job description is looking for. And then in closing, just in a short and sweet way, summarize and restate your passion. So let's look at the next slide. introduction, what and why. So next slide, please. So a standard way of introducing is just, this, right? Please accept this cover letter and attach resume. Again, you're not, even though you are telling them your intention to apply, but there isn't really anything that stood out. So what you want to think about in terms of level up your introduction is talk about, your knowledge and excitement about the employer. Why do you want to work for this particular organization? But also, if you can identify the need or promise a benefit. So let's look at some examples of what I mean by that. So again, I might not be reading out every single paragraph because, you will have the slides and you can read a little bit more. But, talking about maybe timely and showing knowledge about your employer, right? If you do a little bit of research about what that organization is looking for, are you able to sort of highlight and align yourself, right, to that employer, right? Maybe it's identifying a particular need that, the experience that you have that is really, that you really want to focus on. Right. But it could also be promising a benefit, right? Maybe the way that, hey, if you allow me to join your team, this is something that I can bring to, right? So sort of really highlighting your interest, your passion, through the first paragraph. Because again, assuming that this is the introduction, this is something that they're going to be reading right away. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the body, it's always about how do you say this, I am your match, right? But also including some evidence. Next slide, please. So taking a look at some example, right? Talking about maybe highlighting some of your past experience, highlighting what you've done in a way of highlighting certain skills that match the work that they're doing, they are looking for. So it's almost like, in a way, going back to those two Lego heads, picture that I have earlier, is how can you talk about what you've done and the skill set you have in terms of addressing some of the key areas, right? So this gives you a chance to, again, in a more narrative or storytelling way, explain what you've done. Next slide, please. So when it comes to closing, it's all about sort of, again, summarizing your fit and passion. So next slide, please. So standard closing would be, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting with you. I believe my skills. So this is a lot of very general, but if you look at perhaps a better way of doing it is how can you, next slide, please. A better way of closing it is, how do you highlight certain passion that you have? And again, I want to say that not every job is going to be your most ideal fit, right? But if you are interested in the organization, right, highlight that. If you're interested in working for a particular sector, you can highlight that. As long as truthful to who you are and who you are as a person and what you want, it does carry some of that, not just you can do the job, but you love this job that you're applying for. So something for you to think about. So again, I'm very much cognizant of time here. So next slide. I know I kind of really fast forward in covering cover letter in a mere minutes. So again, I see a question there. I'm just going to quickly address that. But before we wrap up, next slide, please, Alice. So I love to, oh, sorry, previous slide. Oh, did I muted that slide? 66, please. Oh, did we miss that slide? I might have muted that slide. So if you can do slide 66, that will be great. If you, just stop share for a second. So basically okay, you know what? I think I can do this way. Let me share my screen because I just wanted to, so keep the slide intact. I'm going to go back to you in a bit. But what I wanted to ask the room is, hang on a second here. All right, can everybody see my slide there? Okay, so I want to say, as a result of hearing all the information and ideas that I've shared with you, what is 1 or 2 words that describe how you feel right now, after hearing all this information, right? Again, it's completely anonymous. Would just love to hear how you feel. So while you're doing that, let me just go back to the Q&A, and you can also keep dropping questions that you have. So this person asking specifically about cover letter, is it okay to share more personal details in my cover letter about my story and what makes me unique? This is a great question, right? Because there's a fine line between personal information and privacy, but also making your story unique. I really like how you phrase that question. So I would say, try to toe the fine line between revealing information that doesn't have to be shared. Some of your personal background, like perhaps, your race, your gender, or sexual orientation, some of these private things that you're not obligated to share, but maybe it is your story, your upbringing, maybe you have this hobby, maybe you have this personal experience that make it very that makes it very intriguing. So I guess to answer that question in a sort of one word or summarized form is share as much as you feel comfortable to share. At the same time, make it personal and unique, just like the way that you've talked about it. So that's a great question. I love that question. So let's go back to the poll that I've just asked. There we go. Okay. So yeah, so some of you says more confident, or this is pretty cool. Yeah, excellent. So keep the comments coming. Use 1 to 2 words to describe how you feel as a result of attending this section. Again, I want to acknowledge that that's a lot of information that I'm trying to cram in an hour and 5 minutes to be precise. But I want to acknowledge, I just want to touch on a variety of different things. And if there's a particular area that you want to ask more questions, I'm going to stick around until 1 o'clock to answer your questions, and you're more than welcome to book an appointment. So Alice, if you can show that very last slide, slide number 68, that would be great. I'm going to stop share. So again, we are from Korean Volunteer Services, and you can reach out to us. Looking at all those social media handles, do follow us on Instagram, add us on, like us on Facebook. But if you would like to book an appointment, you can definitely email us with this email address. I also dropped that in the chat, as well as, calling us. But if you do want to, visit our center at the bottom of the Maggie Benson building, you can also come in and and book that appointment. But I figured that might be easier to do just that. So let me just go back to the Q&A section. Oh, now I see that. Okay, sorry, I was scrolling at. I just realized I might have missed a few questions. Okay, there's another question there. So let me just just acknowledge that. So is it okay to share more? Oh, sorry, I see that now. Okay, so I did answer that question. Okay, did I miss anything? Okay, I think I've answered all the questions. So if you have any more questions, feel free to drop that in the Q&A, and I will definitely wanted to address that. And yes, so I also see a private comment on the chat. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. So what I'm going to say is this marks the official ending of the workshop. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And at the same time, like I promised, I'll stick around for at least another half an hour, if not more, if you have any questions in a more private way. So we can definitely do that. But I just want to say thank you for being here. And again, don't feel shy to reach out. So on that note, I'm going to stop recording right here. Actually, before I stop that, Azam, do you have anything you want to add? Anything you wanted to wrap up at the end?
No, thanks. Thanks again for that. That was very good. I think this is the time where we can just get some questions answered, maybe specific questions. I have some, and definitely encourage all of you to do that as well. Please make an appointment. It's I'm not sure how long the appointments are, but it's well worth your time. It won't hurt you. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when it comes to resume and cover letter, we do have a wonderful team of peer educators, career peer educators. So right now, I think when we're talking about resume and cover letter, you do get that fairly soon, definitely next week, if not the same week. Okay. So on that note, I'm just going to stop recording.